Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's tale begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. A long while ago, back in the mid-1990s, I was working as a countryside ranger on the West Coast. It was the kind of job that put you alone in wide, quiet places for hours at a time. Long walks through woodland and rough terrain, checking boundaries, recording plant life, surveying habitats that most people never saw. You learned to be comfortable with silence. You learned the difference between natural sounds and the ones that didn't belong. On that particular day, I was carrying out a Phase 1 habitat survey. It was routine work, slow and methodical, the kind where your mind drifts while your body keeps moving. The area I was assigned was remote, unmanaged woodland. No trails, no signage, no reason for anyone to be there unless they truly wanted to be alone. Thick trees, uneven ground, moss everywhere. The air damp and heavy with that deep forest smell that never really leaves your clothes. I had been walking for a while when something caught my eye that didn't fit. At first it was just a shape, a break in the pattern of trees and undergrowth. Something straight-edged where everything else was soft and organic. I pushed through some low branches and saw it clearly, a camp. Not the remains of a campfire or a bit of litter, but a full setup, a tent partially collapsed. A small stove nearby, a kettle, cooking pots, a sleeping bag inside the tent, a rucksack leaning against one side, and right at the entrance of the tent, neatly placed, a pair of walking boots. Each boot had a sock tucked inside it. That detail stopped me cold. People don't usually leave boots like that unless they intend to come back. It's a small thing, but it's deliberate, orderly, personal. It wasn't trash dumped by someone passing through. It wasn't abandoned gear from a careless hiker. It felt like a place someone had lived in, or at least planned to live in. But something was wrong. The tent fabric was torn and brittle. The color faded almost to nothing. Moss had crept up the sides. Pine needles filled the cooking pots. The stove was rusted beyond use. The kettle was coated in grime and lichen. The sleeping bag inside the tent was damp, matted, and clearly hadn't been touched in a very long time. This camp hadn't been used in months. It hadn't even been used in a year. It had been there for years. That realization settled in slowly like a weight. I stood there listening to the forest around me. No voices, no footsteps, no movement beyond the usual birds and insects. The woods felt the same as they had all morning, but now there was an edge to it, a sense that I was standing in the middle of an unanswered question. I approached carefully, calling out as I did, more out of instinct than expectation. No response. I checked the rucksack next. Inside were a couple of items of clothing, also weathered and stiff with age. Nothing else. No wallet, no papers, no food, no maps, no identification of any kind. And then there was the flute. It was wrapped loosely in cloth, protected more carefully than anything else in the bag. A simple flute, nothing ornate or valuable looking, but clearly important to whoever owned it. It hadn't been left behind by accident. Someone had chosen to bring it here, into the woods, far from anyone else, and someone had chosen to leave it. That was the moment the situation shifted from strange to deeply unsettling. People abandon camps for lots of reasons: weather, injury, fear, but they usually take the things that matter most to them. They take their boots. They take their bag. They take the one object that brings them comfort. They don't leave everything behind and walk away barefoot into remote woodland. I radioed it in immediately. Within a short time, the area was no longer just mine. Police were notified. Search dogs were brought in. Local volunteers joined. Mountain rescue teams combed the surrounding terrain. The search expanded outward in careful patterns, checking ravines, watercourses, dense thickets, anywhere a person might have fallen or become trapped. We found nothing. No remains, no clothing, no signs of a struggle, no tracks that led anywhere meaningful. The ground had long since reclaimed whatever traces might once have existed. Years of rain, wind, animals, and growth had erased them. Days turned into weeks. Still nothing. Locals were questioned. No one remembered anyone camping there long term. No reports of a missing person that matched what little we could guess about the owner of the camp. No stories of a hermit or drifter living in those woods. No rumors. Nothing. It was as if the person had simply stepped out of existence. What stayed with me wasn't just the mystery, but the feeling of intention behind the camp. This wasn't someone passing through. They had chosen this place. They had set themselves up to stay. The kettle, the stove, the sleeping bag, the way the boots were placed, it all spoke of routine, of a life lived quietly and deliberately away from others. And then, one day, that life stopped. I often think about that moment. What made them leave? Did something scare them? Did they hear something in the night? Did they follow a sound, a voice, a thought they couldn't ignore? Did they intend to come right back and never got the chance? Or did they walk away on purpose, deciding they no longer needed any of it? The flute haunts me the most. Music is a companion. People bring instruments into isolation because they don't want to be completely alone. That flute meant something. It was a voice in a place without voices. The idea that someone would leave it behind suggests either extreme desperation or a decision so final that possessions no longer mattered. We'll never know. The woods closed back over the site eventually. The camp was removed for safety reasons, but the place itself remains unchanged. Trees still stand where they always did. Moss still grows thick on the ground. Birds still move through the canopy like nothing ever happened. But I know, every time I walk through unmanaged woodland now, I think about that camp, about the quiet way it waited to be found, about the person who lived there long enough for moss to claim their belongings, about how easy it is to disappear in places like that, even without meaning to. There was no ending to that story, no explanation, no resolution, just a silent clearing in the woods and a flute left behind, as if someone set it down for a moment and never came back to pick it up. And that somehow is worse than knowing the truth. This is one of those stories that still feels unreal no matter how many times I replay it in my head. It sits in that uncomfortable space between rumor and memory. Except I know at least part of it is real because I was there when the phone call came in. I didn't know the woman personally, but I knew someone who did. And the way it affected him made it impossible to dismiss as exaggeration or gossip. The woman worked in a federal government laboratory in Canada. Her work was classified, and she was employed by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. The kind of job where you don't talk about what you do even with friends or family. From everything I was told, she was intelligent, careful, and deeply ethical. Not reckless, not impulsive, not someone who bent rules, let alone shattered them. One day, while she was at work, she became violently ill. This wasn't subtle. It wasn't a headache or nausea that slowly built up. Whatever happened hit her hard and fast. She was clearly in medical distress, enough that emergency response was immediate. She wasn't taken to the hospital by a normal civilian ambulance. Military medical staff were involved. That detail alone says a lot about how seriously the situation was treated from the very beginning. When she arrived at the hospital, she was conscious and able to speak. Doctors tried to assess what was happening, but almost immediately they ran into a wall. She told them she had taken something to kill herself. She said she had expected it to work faster. She said she had taken it deliberately. Then she said something far more disturbing. She told them the substance came from the lab where she worked. Doctors pressed her for details. They needed to know what she had ingested in order to treat her. Time mattered. But she refused to say what it was. She would not name it. She would not describe it. She would not give them anything to work with. She only said one thing with certainty. No one else would be harmed by what she had done. By this point, members of CSIS were already present at the hospital. They had accompanied her there, reportedly because of the classified nature of her work. When doctors turned to them for information, hoping they could at least narrow down what the substance might be, the response was chilling. They said they could not disclose what she might have ingested. They acknowledged that laboratory records would almost certainly show what was missing or accessed. They admitted that with cooperation, the substance could likely be identified, but they refused to provide any information to the medical staff. They cited national security concerns and said they were prohibited from sharing classified details, even to save her life. Hospital staff were effectively left blind. They didn't know what toxin, compound, or agent they were dealing with. They didn't know how it acted on the body. They didn't know whether it could be neutralized, diluted, slowed, or countered. They were forced into supportive care only, treating symptoms as they appeared without understanding the cause. She was moved into isolation. Military guards were posted outside her room. This wasn't just about infection control. Access was restricted completely. Her husband was not allowed to see her. Her parents were not allowed to see her. No family members were permitted into the room. Whatever was happening inside that hospital room was no longer just a medical emergency. It had become a matter of state control. She continued to deteriorate. From what I was told, it took several hours for her to die. Not minutes, not instant collapse. Hours. During that time, she never changed her story. She never identified the substance. She never begged for help in the way you might expect from someone, panicking at the end. She maintained that what she had taken would not harm anyone else. That was it. She died without anyone truly understanding what had happened to her body. This is where my personal connection to the story begins. One of my colleagues had gone to university with her. They weren't casual acquaintances. They were friends. He knew her character. He knew how she thought. He knew how seriously she took rules, ethics, and responsibility. When he got the phone call, it shook him badly. The call came from her husband. He was desperate. He was trying to find legal help, any help, to force the hospital or the government to let him see his wife before she died. He didn't understand what was happening. He had been shut out completely. He was being told nothing. My colleague listened, stunned, trying to process what he was hearing in real time. He didn't have the expertise to help. This wasn't his area of law. He referred the husband to someone else, hoping they might be able to intervene. But from what I understand, it didn't matter. Nothing changed. Neither the husband nor her parents were ever allowed into that room. After her death, things became even stranger. Reportedly, her body was claimed by the government. It was not released to the family. There was no normal funeral process. She was cremated at an unknown government facility. The ashes were never returned to her husband or her parents. The family was never told what happened to her remains or where they ultimately ended up. There was no closure, no explanation, no answers. As far as I know, this happened around 1987. It was before the internet, before social media, before stories like this could spread widely or be dissected publicly. If there was an investigation, it wasn't visible. If there were internal reports, they were never shared. The entire event disappeared into silence. What disturbed my colleague the most wasn't just the secrecy. It was the contradiction. He was shocked that she would attempt suicide at all. He was shocked that she would violate lab protocols. He was shocked that she would steal or ingest an unknown substance. He said the woman he knew would never deliberately break a rule, especially not one involving safety or security. This wasn't someone reckless or unstable. This was, in his words, the most law-abiding, ethical person he had ever known. That's what makes the story so unsettling. Either something happened to her that no one outside a classified circle will ever know, or she made a decision so completely out of character that it defies understanding. And layered on top of that is the image of doctors standing helplessly by, knowing they could potentially save her if they were allowed to know what they were dealing with, and being told they were not allowed to ask. It raises questions that have no answers. What kind of substance exists that is so dangerous, so sensitive, that its name cannot be spoken even to save a life? What kind of system prioritizes secrecy over a human being dying in a hospital bed? And what kind of pressure must she have been under to choose that path, knowing exactly how it would end? I don't know what is true beyond what I witnessed secondhand that day. My colleague sitting there, pale and shaken, holding a phone after speaking to a man who was being denied the right to see his dying wife. I don't know what classified truths sit behind the official silence. I don't know if the full story will ever come out. But I know this much. Whatever happened in that lab followed her all the way to her deathbed. And even in death, she did not belong to her family. She belonged to the state. That's what makes it so haunting. Not just that she died, but that she vanished into secrecy so completely that even her ashes were taken, leaving nothing behind for the people who loved her except questions that will never be answered. This happened to me about 10 years ago, and even now, with time and distance, it still sits in the back of my mind in a way I can't fully explain. Not like a sharp fear, more like an unresolved knot. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or signs from beyond. I never have. I'm practical by nature, technical, the kind of person who wants a mechanism, a cause, a reason that fits inside the rules of how things work. And yet this is one of those moments that refuses to stay neatly contained. My best friend growing up was named Steve. We had known each other since we were kids, the kind of friendship that forms early and feels unbreakable at the time. We did everything together. As we got older, life happened the way it always does. People change. Priorities shift. We drifted apart slowly, not because of a fight or some big falling out, but because adulthood has a way of pulling people in different directions. Steve was never an easy person. He could be abrasive, stubborn, and difficult. Son of a bitch isn't an exaggeration. It's just an honest description. He didn't soften with age. He didn't mellow out. He pushed people away, sometimes deliberately. Over time, he became estranged from most of his family. For about 10 years before he died, he barely spoke to them at all. One thing about Steve that never changed was his hatred of technology. And I don't mean mild dislike or reluctance. I mean hatred. He wanted nothing to do with it. No computer, no email, no cell phone, no internet. He thought it was invasive, pointless, and stupid. He refused to engage with it in any form. The only concessions he made were a television with an antenna and a landline phone. A basic old-school desk phone. That was it. He lived like it was still decades earlier, and he was proud of it. Ironically, I went the opposite direction. At the time, I worked for a satellite telecommunications company. My entire career revolved around complex systems, back-office telecom equipment, call routing, signaling networks. I dealt with SS7, routing tables, number assignments, and the invisible machinery that makes phone calls work. I understood how fragile and how precise those systems are, how many moving parts are involved every time a call connects. Steve and I joked about it when we reconnected. He would tease me about working in a world he wanted nothing to do with. I would tease him about living like a man out of time. Despite our differences, it felt good to talk again after so many years. There was history there. Shared memories, a sense of familiarity that doesn't fade completely, no matter how long you've been apart. Then he died. It was unexpected. No long illness, no warning. I was away on business when I got the call. Even hearing it secondhand felt unreal. Because he was unmarried, had no kids, and was estranged from his family, no one noticed right away. His body wasn't discovered for a couple of weeks. That fact still haunts me. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes it hits me out of nowhere. The idea of someone you once knew so well, alone in their house, gone, unnoticed for that long. No phone calls unanswered because he didn't have many. No emails piling up because he didn't use them. No missed texts raising alarms, just silence. When I finally got home, everything felt off. Familiar places felt hollow. I thought about calling him more than once before remembering there was no one to answer. Not anymore. I hadn't even had time to fully process his death before I had to leave again. Shortly after returning home, I left for another trip, this time to Texas, for a course I was attending. It was routine, professional, the kind of thing I'd done many times before. Sitting in a classroom, listening to an instructor, half focused, half distracted. My phone was set to vibrate, as it always was. Then it buzzed. I glanced down without thinking. It was Steve. Not a similar name, not an unknown number. His name, his number, the one that had been in my contacts for years. The same landline number he'd had forever, because of course he did. A cold flush swept over me so fast it felt physical. Like someone had poured ice water straight down my spine. For a moment, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to make it make sense. I was sitting in class, so I didn't answer. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. My hands felt numb. My heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear exactly. More like shock. This wasn't possible. He was dead. He had been dead for weeks. I told myself to stay calm. There were explanations. There always are. A number can be reassigned. Someone could have picked up his old landline service, a misdial, a glitch. I forced myself to keep listening to the lecture, though I couldn't tell you a single word that was said after that. Later that day, once I was alone, I called the number back. As expected, there was no answer. No voicemail pickup. No ring that felt different. Just the familiar emptiness of an unanswered call. I stood there holding the phone, feeling ridiculous for how shaken I was. I reminded myself again and again that I didn't believe in anything supernatural. I'd built my entire career on understanding systems, logic, predictable behavior. Phones don't call people from beyond the grave. That's not how reality works. And yet, the weirdness of it refused to let go. Because here's the thing. I knew too much about how phone systems work to dismiss it easily. If the number had been reassigned, that process would have been recorded. If someone else now owned the line, they could have misdialed me, sure. But why would they call me? My number wouldn't be in their phone. And Steve's landline wasn't a modern device with a contact list or call history synced anywhere. It was a plain old Potts desk phone. Could someone have accidentally hit redial? Possibly. But redial would call the last number dialed from that phone. Who would that have been? Steve hadn't been calling many people near the end. He was isolated. And even then, it wouldn't explain why the caller ID showed his name and number exactly as it always had. I thought about routing tables, SS7 signaling, how caller ID information is passed along networks. I tried to imagine a scenario where stale data, misconfiguration, or a delayed signaling event could result in something like that. None of it felt convincing. Unlikely things happen in complex systems, but not like this. Not cleanly. Not without leaving some traceable explanation. The randomness bothered me most. If it had happened immediately after his death, I might have chalked it up to confusion around service termination. If it had happened months later, I might have assumed reassignment. But the timing, right in that narrow window when I was already emotionally off balance, felt cruel in a way randomness often does. I don't think Steve was trying to reach me. I don't think there was a message or a sign or a goodbye. I don't think there was intent behind it at all. That's not how I see the world. But I also can't pretend it didn't happen. I can't explain it in a way that satisfies me completely. And that's rare for someone like me. Most things, given enough digging, resolve into something mundane. This one never quite did. Now that I'm retired, I have more time to sit with memories I used to push aside. I think about Steve sometimes, about how stubborn he was, about how fiercely he rejected the very technology that ended up being part of the strangest moment connected to his death. There's an irony there that I can't ignore. I also think about assumptions. I've spent my life believing that the world is explainable, that mystery is just ignorance waiting to be filled in. I still believe that, mostly. But experiences like this have a way of softening the edges of certainty, not shattering it, just bending it slightly. I don't tell this story because I want it to be something more than it is. I tell it because it happened, and because it unsettled me in a way few things ever have. Not because it made me believe in ghosts, but because it reminded me how thin our understanding can feel sometimes, even when we know how the machinery works. There are moments in life that don't change what you believe, but they make you hold those beliefs a little less tightly. This was one of those moments. Somewhere, in a system designed to be orderly and predictable, something hiccuped at exactly the wrong time and touched a raw nerve I didn't know was still exposed. And even though I can list a dozen possible explanations, none of them land with the certainty I'm used to. Steve is gone. That much is real. The call came through anyway. That's real too. Everything else sits in the space between, unresolved, waiting quietly, like a phone that rang once and will never ring again. When I was 13, my world was still small enough that danger felt like something you could see coming. I lived in the suburbs, the kind of place where parents worried about curfews and grades, not about disappearing. My best friend and I thought we were grown because older boys paid attention to us. They were a few years ahead, had cars, knew back roads, and spoke with the confidence that makes you believe they understand how the world really works. They used to take us driving at night, out of the neighborhoods and onto forested, unpaved roads that felt like another country compared to the cul-de-sacs we came from. The pavement would end, the headlights would catch dust and branches, and suddenly everything felt quieter and bigger. Trees crowded in close, the road narrowed, houses disappeared, the air smelled different, damp and earthy. It felt like crossing a line you weren't supposed to cross. That's when the stories started. They told us that if we kept driving, we'd end up going through a Ku Klux Klan camp. They said it casually, like it was just another landmark, but there was a tension under it. They told us we'd probably be fine because we were white, but they said it in a way that made my stomach tighten anyway. They talked about it like it was a place you didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't look at too closely. Then they'd go further. If you kept driving past that, they said, you'd reach a biker place. Somewhere you should never go alone, ever. They said bad things happened there, really bad things. They didn't describe much, just enough to let your imagination do the rest. Girls went missing. Girls got hurt. Girls didn't come back the same, if they came back at all. At 13, we told ourselves they were just trying to scare us. Older boys do that. They like to feel powerful. They like to watch younger kids react. We laughed it off, pretended we weren't bothered, rolled our eyes and said they were full of it. But there was one guy whose voice changed when he talked about it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It was flat, serious, almost warning-like. He said the name quietly, like saying it too loudly might draw attention. Piggy's Palace. He didn't smile when he said it. He didn't joke. He just said it was a place you didn't go, and then he changed the subject. Now that stuck with me. Even then, I could tell the difference between a scary story and something that felt real. There was a weight to it. Like he wasn't trying to entertain us, but trying to make sure we remembered. Life moved on. We grew up. Those nights became memories, filed away as teenage nonsense, the kind of thing you look back on and shake your head at. We assumed it was all exaggeration, local legends mixed with bravado and fear, suburban kids playing at danger without really understanding it. 30 years passed. Then the news broke, and everything shifted. That spot, that general area, wasn't just some made-up horror story meant to scare teenage girls. It was real, and it was far worse than anything we had imagined. A serial killer had been operating there, feeding his victims to pigs on his farm. When I first heard the details, my mind went straight back to those drives. The dirt roads, the trees, the seriousness in that one boy's voice. The name Piggy's Palace. Suddenly, it didn't sound childish or ridiculous anymore. It sounded like a warning passed down in fragments, stripped of detail but heavy with truth. The man at the center of it was Robert Picton. What came out about him was horrifying, but what haunted me even more was how long it went on, and how many people knew something was wrong without knowing enough to stop it. He was one of several brothers, and over time it became clear that the farm wasn't just one man's secret. It was a place where terrible things were allowed to happen, where silence and neglect created a perfect hiding place for violence. Picton became the face of the crimes, the name everyone remembers, but many believe he was also a patsy for a wider circle of abuse and death, a convenient monster to absorb blame. What is clear is that he enjoyed what he did to the women who were most vulnerable, women who were already on the margins, women who were addicted, homeless, desperate, or just unlucky enough to cross the wrong path. He tortured women who were left behind, passed out, passed around, drugged up. Women who didn't have anyone looking for them loudly enough. Women whose disappearances didn't trigger immediate alarms. He took advantage of the fact that society had already decided their lives mattered less. He didn't just wait for victims to come to him. He was sent into downtown Vancouver to bring women back to the farm. He acted as a recruiter, a lure. He blended in just enough to seem harmless, familiar, like someone who belonged. And that made him even more dangerous. When the truth came out, the details were almost unbearable. Bodies dismembered, remains fed to pigs, evidence destroyed in the most literal way possible, a farm designed to erase people completely, leaving nothing behind but rumors and fear. Suddenly, those teenage warnings didn't sound like exaggeration at all. They sounded like the watered-down version of something people half knew but couldn't fully articulate. The kind of knowledge that circulates quietly, passed from mouth to mouth without proof, without names, without context. Just enough to say, don't go there. Don't push your luck. Don't ask questions. What chills me the most is how close we were. We were kids, 13 years old, sitting in cars with older boys, driving down roads we didn't understand, trusting people we barely knew because they felt familiar and confident. We were lucky. That's all it was. Luck, not judgment. Not awareness, just luck. Looking back now, I think about how easily things could have gone differently. How many women ended up at that farm because someone trusted the wrong person, got into the wrong car, believed a lie, or had no better options. How many warnings were dismissed as rumors or jokes? How many people felt uneasy but didn't know what to do with that feeling? I think about the seriousness in that one boy's voice and wonder what he knew. Did he hear something firsthand? Did someone warn him the same way he warned us? Was it common knowledge among certain people that there were places you didn't go, roads you didn't take, invitations you didn't accept? And I think about how those warnings were framed. They told us we'd probably be okay because we were white. That alone says everything about the kind of danger they were talking about, and the kind of world it existed in. Violence that targets specific people, places that operate on the assumption that some lives are disposable. Some bodies are easier to erase than others. At 13, we didn't have the language to understand that. We just felt a vague fear, a thrill mixed with discomfort. We didn't know how real it was. Now, decades later, I can't shake the feeling that we brushed up against something enormous and deadly without realizing it. That we were standing at the edge of a story that would take years to fully surface, and even then would never be completely told. Because even with arrests and trials and headlines, there are still unanswered questions. How many victims were there really? How many people knew? How many looked away? How many warnings went unheeded because they sounded too unbelievable, too ugly, too inconvenient? What stays with me isn't just the horror of what happened on that farm. It's the way it existed quietly alongside normal life. The way kids could hear about it in fragments. The way adults could suspect something without acting. The way danger can become part of the landscape normalized through rumor and silence. Those forested roads are probably paved now, or at least better traveled. The area may look ordinary to someone passing through, just another stretch of land with a dark history buried underneath. But for me, it will always be tied to that feeling in the back seat of a car, listening to older boys talk about places you don't go, sensing that one of them wasn't joking. Some horrors don't announce themselves with sirens or headlines. They exist as whispers, as warnings, as names said quietly. Piggy's Palace, a place we were told never to go. A place that turned out to be far worse than any story meant to scare a couple of 13-year-old girls. And the most unsettling part is knowing that even when the truth finally comes out, it only reveals a fraction of what really happened. The rest stays buried, like so many of the people who never came back. Over a period of days, small, unsettling things began happening around the farm. Nothing dramatic at first. Nothing that would immediately send someone running for help. Just details that didn't sit right once you noticed them. It was winter, and snow had settled thick across the fields and paths. One morning, footprints appeared in the snow leading from the edge of the property toward the farmhouse. The strange part wasn't that someone had walked up to the house. It was that the footprints stopped there. There were no tracks leading away again. Whoever had come to the farm hadn't left, at least not in any obvious way. At the time, the family didn't know what to make of it. Rural life comes with oddities. People pass through. Animals wander. Snow plays tricks on perception. Still, the footprints lingered in their minds, especially when more things began to feel wrong. Strange noises were heard at night, footsteps overhead, sounds that suggested movement in parts of the house no one was using. The house was old, and old houses make noise, especially in winter. Wood contracts. Wind finds its way through cracks. But these sounds felt deliberate, heavy, as if someone was shifting their weight, pacing, stopping to listen. The maid noticed it more than anyone else. She worked inside the house every day. She knew its rhythms, its normal creaks and groans. When something changed, she felt it immediately. She began to complain about noises she couldn't explain. She said she felt watched, that the house felt wrong, like something was sharing the space with them. Eventually, she quit. She left abruptly, giving little notice, telling anyone who asked that the place was haunted and that she was afraid. In a rural community, that kind of talk was easy to dismiss. Superstition, nerves, overactive imagination. But her decision would end up saving her life. A new maid was hired not long after. On the first night of her job, everything changed. Sometime after dark, a man descended from the attic. It's believed now that he had been hiding there for days, possibly longer, living above the family without their knowledge, watching them, listening to their routines, learning when they slept, when they were alone, when they were vulnerable. The attic was accessible, and in winter it would have been easy to remain hidden, especially in a house where strange sounds had already been explained away. That night, he came down quietly. What happened next was not fast. It was not chaotic. It was systematic. One by one, members of the family were lured into an outbuilding, the barn, under pretense or force. Each was murdered in turn. Some were killed quickly, others were not. Several survived the initial attacks, long enough to understand what was happening, long enough to watch their family members die in front of them. There was no mercy in it, no frenzy, just repetition. The youngest children were not spared. When the bodies were eventually discovered, Investigators found something that haunted even seasoned officials. One of the youngest girls had torn out tufts of her own hair, not after death, but as she was dying. The act wasn't random. It was a physical response to terror so overwhelming that her body had nowhere else to put it. She had been conscious. She had been aware. She had been trapped in a moment of absolute horror. The murders didn't end in the barn. After killing the family, the man did not flee. Instead, he stayed. For several days, he lived in the house. He slept in the beds. He ate the food stored in the kitchen. He tended to the animals, feeding them, caring for them as if nothing had happened. Smoke rose from the chimney. The farm appeared occupied. From the outside, life seemed to continue as normal. No one suspected that the people inside were already dead. That detail is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The idea that someone could commit such violence and then calmly inhabit the space afterward. Not hiding in panic, not rushing to escape, but settling in, using the home, moving through rooms where bodies lay nearby. It suggests comfort, familiarity, or a chilling lack of emotional response. Eventually, the man left. He disappeared sometime shortly before the bodies were discovered. No one knows exactly when. There were no witnesses, no clear trail, just the sudden absence of whatever presence had been maintaining the illusion of normal life on the farm. When neighbors finally grew concerned and went to check on the family, they found a scene that defied comprehension. The entire household had been wiped out. The brutality of the murders shocked the community. The isolation of the farm made it worse. This wasn't a crime of opportunity in a crowded area. This was something that required patience, planning, and an understanding of the family's routines. Investigators searched desperately for answers. They examined the attic and found signs that someone had been living there. A makeshift bed, evidence of food consumption, proof that the noises the first maid had heard were real, that someone had been watching from above while the family went about their daily lives. They followed leads, questioned neighbors, examined anyone who had reason to be near the farm. But nothing stuck. There was no clear suspect, no confession, no physical evidence that pointed definitively to one person. The killer was never found. To this day, the case remains unsolved. What makes it especially haunting isn't just the violence, but the slow build-up to it. The warning signs that, in hindsight, feel painfully obvious. The footprints that went only one way. The sounds in the attic. The maid who trusted her instincts and left. All the moments where something was wrong, but not wrong enough to trigger immediate action. It's also the aftermath that lingers. The idea that someone could live among the dead for days without detection. That they could perform ordinary tasks like eating and sleeping while surrounded by the evidence of what they had done. That they could care for animals with more consistency than they showed human life. Cases like this force uncomfortable questions. Was the killer someone the family knew? Someone familiar enough to feel at ease in their home? Or a complete stranger who simply decided to stay because he could? Did he feel ownership over the place? Or was it just convenience? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how many times does something like this almost happen, but doesn't because someone listens to a feeling, notices a detail, leaves before it's too late? The former maid never returned to that house. She never had to see what happened inside. She trusted her fear and walked away. It's a reminder that fear, when it's quiet and persistent, isn't always irrational. Sometimes it's the mind picking up on patterns before the conscious brain can explain them. The farm itself became infamous, Over time, it was torn down, the land reclaimed. But the story never really left. It became one of those cases passed down through generations, retold in whispers, studied by investigators, discussed by people who specialize in unsolved crimes. The event is now known as the Hinterkaifeck murders, and even a century later, it remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases in history. What stays with people isn't just the mystery of who did it, but the intimacy of the crime. This wasn't distant violence. It was close, personal. It involved watching, waiting, and inserting oneself into a family's life before erasing it. It's the kind of story that makes you rethink small things. Strange noises, unexplained signs, the instinct to dismiss discomfort because it feels silly or inconvenient. It reminds you that sometimes the most dangerous situations don't announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, one footprint at a time, and wait to see if anyone notices. And sometimes, even when someone does notice, it's already too late. The killer walked away and vanished into history. The family never got justice. The truth never fully surfaced. All that remains is a farmhouse that once stood silent under the snow, a set of footprints that led in but not out, and the knowledge that for days after the murders, someone lived there as if nothing had happened at all. That is what makes the story unbearable to sit with. Not just the violence, but the calm that followed it. The ordinary life that continued in the shadow of something unspeakable. The reminder that evil doesn't always flee the scene. Sometimes it stays, eats at the table, sleeps in the bed, and leaves only when it's ready. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. I was 15 years old, staying at my dad's house over spring break. His place always felt a little different from my mom's. Not bad exactly, just quieter and more unfamiliar. Different sounds at night, different shadows, different rhythms. I was used to it, but it never quite felt like home in the way my other house did. That night, I went to bed like normal. Nothing strange, no fear, no bad feeling, no sense that anything was off. I fell asleep easily. The kind of deep, heavy sleep you get when you're young and on break from school. What woke me up wasn't a noise I recognized. It wasn't a bang or a crash or a voice. It was the sound of someone exhaling, but not normally. It was aggressive, forceful, like air being pushed out of lungs on purpose. The strangest part was how it moved. It didn't start near me. It started far away, somewhere across the room or beyond it, and then it rushed toward me. The best way I can describe it is this. Imagine someone throwing an invisible ball straight at your head, except instead of hitting you physically, it's made of sound and air. The exhale got louder and louder as it came closer until suddenly it was right at my ear. When it hit, it was so loud and so close that it blew my hair sharply to the side. That's what jolted me fully awake. My heart was pounding instantly. I sat up, adrenaline flooding my body, trying to understand what had just happened. For a split second, my brain went straight to the most obvious explanation. Wind. Open window. Draft. Something normal. I looked across the room and saw my curtains moving violently. They weren't just swaying gently. They were blowing hard, snapping and billowing like they do during a storm when a window's wide open. I could hear it, too. a loud rushing sound like wind forcing its way through a screen. My immediate thought was, oh shit, I thought I closed that window. I didn't feel scared yet, just annoyed and startled. I threw the covers off and hurried across the room, the sound still filling the space, the curtains still whipping back and forth. It felt urgent, like I needed to close it quickly before something else happened, before more cold air rushed in. I reached the window, grabbed the curtains, and pulled them aside. Everything stopped, instantly. The sound cut off so abruptly it was like someone had flipped a switch. The curtains fell limp. The air went completely still, no breeze, no noise, nothing, and the window was already closed, not cracked. Not unlocked, fully shut. I stood there frozen, staring at it, my hand still on the curtain. I checked it. I touched the glass. I ran my fingers along the frame. There was no gap, no movement, no reason for any air to be coming through at all. The room felt unnaturally quiet after that, like the silence had weight to it. My ears rang slightly, the way they do after a loud noise stops suddenly. My heart was still racing, but now confusion was replacing the initial shock. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, staring at the window, trying to replay the last few seconds in my head, trying to find the mistake, trying to figure out what I'd misunderstood. Curtains don't blow like that without wind. Hair doesn't get pushed aside without air moving. Sounds don't rush across a room and stop on a dime for no reason. I checked the rest of the room. Nothing had fallen. Nothing was out of place. The door was closed. The house was silent. Eventually, I walked back to my bed. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't get my dad. I didn't scream or cry or run. I just climbed back under the covers and lay there, wide awake, staring into the darkness. I stayed like that until the sun came up. Every small sound made my body tense. The settling of the house, a distant car, the hum of something electrical. I kept replaying the moment over and over, trying to force a logical explanation to stick. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe there was a pressure change. Maybe the curtain moved for some other reason, and my brain filled in the rest. But none of it fit. Dreams don't blow your hair to the side. Half-asleep hallucinations don't make curtains thrash violently and then stop the exact moment you look at them. And even if I had imagined the sound, the physical sensation was still there, vivid and unmistakable. By morning, I was exhausted. I got up when the sun finally filled the room and everything looked normal again. Peaceful, ordinary, the same room I'd slept in many times before. I checked the window one more time. Still closed. Still fine. I never experienced anything like that again in that house. I've thought about it a lot over the years. More than I probably should. I don't jump straight to supernatural explanations. I'm not someone who wants everything to be a ghost or a presence or something unseen. I want things to make sense. But that moment never fully has. Even now, I can still remember exactly how it sounded, how it felt, how sudden and precise it was. I can remember the way the air hit my ear, the way my hair moved, the way the room went dead silent when I realized the window was closed. I've never been able to come up with an explanation that actually satisfies me. And maybe that's why it still sticks with me. Not because it was violent or threatening, but because it was so brief, so physical, and so completely out of place. It didn't linger. It didn't repeat. It just happened. And then it was gone, leaving me alone in a quiet room with no answers. Some experiences don't leave scars or fear behind. They leave questions. And those questions sit with you for years. resurfacing late at night when the house is quiet and the air feels too still, reminding you that sometimes something happens that doesn't fit neatly into the rules you rely on. That night was one of those times. On the morning of June 5th, 1983, Bill Hughes arrived at a semi-rural home in Chino Hills, California, where his 11-year-old son, Christopher, had spent the night. He expected an ordinary pickup. Maybe breakfast smells still lingering, maybe kids half asleep on the couch. Instead, he walked into a scene that would become one of the most disturbing and controversial murder cases in California history. Inside the house, he found Douglas and Peggy Ryan dead. Their 10-year-old daughter, Jessica, was dead as well. So was Christopher, his own son. The violence was extreme and chaotic. They had been attacked with a hatchet, slashed with a knife, and stabbed repeatedly with what investigators later identified as an ice pick. The amount of force used suggested rage, panic, or both. And the scene showed signs of a prolonged and brutal assault rather than a single, quick act. One child was still alive. 8-year-old Josh Ryan, the youngest son of Douglas and Peggy, had survived the attack. His throat had been cut, but not deeply enough to kill him. He was found alive among the bodies of his family. The fact that he survived would later become one of the most important and troubling aspects of the case. From the beginning, the crime scene raised questions. Mrs. Ryan's purse sat in plain sight on the kitchen counter, undisturbed. No money had been taken. There were no clear signs of burglary. Whatever had happened inside that house did not look like a robbery gone wrong. It looked personal, targeted, and deeply violent. One thing was missing. The family station wagon was gone. For several days, investigators searched for it, unsure whether it had been taken by the killer to escape or whether it might hold further evidence. When it was finally found in Long Beach, about 50 miles southwest of Chino Hills, it only deepened the mystery. The car had been abandoned. Inside, there were signs that someone had traveled a long distance after the murders, but no clear indication of who that person was. At first, the case seemed impossible. There was no obvious suspect. The Ryans were a quiet family. They didn't have known enemies. The crime was vicious, but it didn't fit neatly into any familiar category. The brutality suggested someone close, yet nothing immediately pointed to a specific person. Then attention turned to Josh. As the only survivor, he was interviewed repeatedly. At first, his statements were confused, fragmented, and inconsistent, which was not surprising, given his age and the trauma he had endured. But over time, investigators became convinced that he knew more than he was saying. Eventually, Josh told police that the attacker was someone he knew. He said it was a friend of his parents, a man who had been at the house before. He gave a name. That name would change everything. The investigation shifted focus, and the case took a dramatic turn that would divide law enforcement, the courts, and the public for decades. What followed was not just a murder case, but a long, bitter legal battle filled with questions about memory, trauma, evidence, and whether the justice system got it catastrophically wrong. What makes this case so unsettling isn't only the brutality of the murders, but the lingering uncertainty that followed. Evidence was disputed. Testimony changed. Forensic conclusions were challenged years later as science improved. People who studied the case closely began to ask whether the right person had been blamed or whether the truth had been buried under fear, pressure, and the desperate need for closure. Josh Ryan grew up carrying the weight of that night, not just as a survivor, but as a central figure in a case that never truly settled. His memories, shaped by unimaginable trauma, became the foundation for decisions that would affect multiple lives forever. Even now, decades later, the murders at the Ryan home remain a source of unease. They are remembered not only for their savagery, but for how fragile certainty can be in the aftermath of horror. A family wiped out in their own home. A child left alive to remember it. A missing car found far from the scene. And a truth that, depending on who you ask, may still not be fully known. The case is often referred to as the Chino Hills murders, but that name barely captures what happened inside that house. What really lingers is the sense that something about it never quite fit, and that the answers people accepted at the time may not be the answers that would hold up today. It is one of those stories that refuses to stay in the past, because it sits at the intersection of violence, memory, and doubt. And once you learn the details, it's very hard to stop thinking about what really happened in that house on that quiet morning in 1983. My school had a mandatory uniform policy. From the outside, it looked like a normal, well-run place, structured, disciplined. The kind of school parents trusted because it felt orderly and controlled. Everyone wore the same clothes, followed the same rules, moved through the same routines year after year. Uniforms were supposed to make things safer, simpler, more equal. Because of that policy, the school had its own shop on campus. You bought shirts, trousers, skirts, sweaters, ties, all of it there. It also sold small things like pens, notebooks, erasers. Inside the shop was a small changing room so students could try things on. It wasn't fancy, just a cramped little space with a curtain and a mirror. No one thought twice about it. The man who ran the shop was always there. He was part of the background of school life, like the bell or the lockers. He wasn't a teacher, but he was familiar. He smiled, he chatted. He handed you the right size, he took your money. He seemed harmless, boring even. Just another adult doing a job. Years later, he was arrested. The charge was that he was a pedophile. Allegedly, he had hidden a camera in the changing room. When I first heard that, my brain didn't fully accept it. It felt unreal, like one of those stories you hear about some other place, some other school, somewhere far away. Not here. Not with someone I recognized. Not with someone who had been so normal. But it was real. What hit me hardest wasn't fear for myself. I almost never used that changing room. I usually bought my uniform without trying it on. Male sizes were pretty consistent. As I grew, I'd just go up one size. It worked. I didn't need to stand behind a curtain and change. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just convenience. What terrified me was everyone else, the girls I went to school with. I had known most of them since I was 2 years old, literally since early childhood. We grew up together, same classrooms, same playgrounds, same assemblies. I watched them grow from little kids into teenagers into young adults. I shared lunches with them, group projects, awkward dances, exams, years of life. And for all those years, from early childhood through the beginning of adulthood, they changed in that room. They stood there trying on skirts, shirts, sweaters, adjusting waistband, pulling fabric over their heads, being kids, being teenagers, being vulnerable in the most ordinary, unthinking way. Because why wouldn't they? It was a school shop on school grounds, run by an adult they were told to trust. I can't stop thinking about how many of them were filmed, not just as bodies, but as people, as children, as girls who didn't know they were being watched. How many moments that should have been private ended up recorded. How many times that camera was turned on. How long it was there. How much footage existed before anyone noticed. And then there's the worst part. Not just that they might have ended up on some creep's computer, but that they lived in his head, that he watched them, remembered them, thought about them, that he went home at night carrying images of people I knew, people I cared about, people who trusted that space, that he built a secret inner world around them without their knowledge or consent. That kind of violation doesn't end when the camera is turned off. What makes it even harder to process is how normal he seemed. He was the same guy who sold me a pen, or an eraser, or a replacement tie. He was calm, friendly, polite. He didn't act nervous or strange. He didn't feel dangerous. He felt forgettable. And that's what scares me most. There was no obvious warning sign. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't behave like one in public. He blended in perfectly. He was trusted with children every single day because he fit the role so well. He was part of the system, and the system never questioned him until it was too late. When I think back now, I replay small moments and wonder if there was anything off that I missed. Any look held too long, any comment that didn't sit right. But the truth is, I don't remember anything like that. And that's unsettling in its own way. It means people like him don't need to be obvious. They don't need to scare you. They just need access. The changing room itself feels different in my memory now. At the time, it was just a cramped little space. Now it feels heavy, like a trap disguised as something normal. A place designed for privacy that was secretly doing the opposite. I think about how young some of those kids were, how early they started wearing uniforms, how little they understood about boundaries, about consent, about the idea that an adult could exploit something so mundane. They trusted the rules. They trusted the school. They trusted that the adults in charge were keeping them safe. And they weren't. The betrayal isn't just personal. It's institutional. The school created the space. The school hired the man. The school enforced the policy that required kids to use that shop. Even if they didn't know, even if they didn't intend harm, the result is the same. Children were exposed to something they never agreed to. What really stays with me is how quietly it all happened. No alarms, no screams, no immediate damage you could see. Just years of normal school days layered over something rotten underneath. And then one day, the truth comes out and suddenly every memory connected to that place feels contaminated. I wonder how many of the girls ever found out. How many were told directly? How many heard rumors? How many never heard anything at all? How many still carry a vague sense of discomfort without knowing why? How many would look back now and feel sick realizing what might have been happening while they stood there adjusting a uniform? And I wonder how many never wanted to know, because knowing doesn't undo it. It just adds another layer of harm, another thing to process, another violation to carry. What makes it worse is that this wasn't a random public place. This wasn't a mall or a street or somewhere anonymous. This was a closed community, a school where everyone knew each other, where kids grew up together, where parents assumed safety because of familiarity. It's hard to reconcile that kind of evil with such an ordinary setting. It makes you question how many other places like that exist. How many other safe spaces rely entirely on trust and routine, and how easily that trust can be abused by someone who knows how to stay invisible. I think about how we teach kids to be careful around strangers, but rarely talk about the danger of people who are familiar, people who smile, people who help, people who don't raise suspicion because they don't act suspicious. This man didn't need to lure anyone. He didn't need to threaten or coerce. The system delivered children to him one by one every day. All he had to do was hide a camera and wait. That realization changes the way you see the world. It makes you understand that harm doesn't always come from chaos or violence. Sometimes it comes from routine, from repetition, from places where no one is looking closely because everyone assumes someone else already has. I don't know what happened to him after the arrest. I don't know how much evidence there was. I don't know how many victims were identified, if any. I don't know if there was ever a full accounting of what he recorded or where it ended up. What I do know is that the damage doesn't disappear just because someone is caught. Even now, years later, I'll sometimes think about someone I went to school with and feel a quiet, helpless anger. Not at them, at the situation, at the fact that something was taken from them without them ever knowing in the moment, at the idea that their childhood and adolescence included a hidden audience they never consented to. And I think about how easily I could have been one of them if circumstances were slightly different, if sizing had been inconsistent, if I'd needed to try something on, if I'd stepped behind that curtain just once. That thought alone is enough to make my skin crawl. The scariest part isn't just what happened. It's how normal everything felt while it was happening. How a man could be so chill while carrying something so dark inside him. How trust can be weaponized without anyone realizing it, until the damage is already done. It's one of those things that permanently breaks your sense of safety in small, everyday places. You don't walk around terrified, but a part of you never fully relaxes again. You understand, on a deeper level, that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sells you a pen and smiles while it waits. And once you've learned that, you can't unlearn it. My aunt was murdered in 1996, and even now it's hard to write that sentence without feeling like something inside me tightens. It's one thing to hear about violence in the abstract, to read headlines or watch documentaries. It's something else entirely when it reaches into your own family and rewrites who you are, whether you want it to or not. She went to a party that night. Nothing unusual, just a normal social thing, the kind people do all the time without thinking twice. She didn't know the man who killed her. There was no argument, no history, no connection. He wasn't someone from her past or someone she trusted. He was a stranger. Later, we learned that he had decided he wanted to kill someone that day. That's it. That was the reason. She was simply there. Wrong place, wrong time. Her life intersected with someone else's decision to commit violence, and that was enough. There's something deeply unsettling about that randomness, about knowing that nothing she did led to it, nothing she could have avoided by making a different choice earlier in the day. He attacked her with a hatchet. The brutality of that detail is hard to sit with. A hatchet isn't quick. It's close. It's personal in the worst possible way. He bludgeoned her to death, and then, as if that wasn't enough, he dismembered her body. He tried to burn what was left, as if he could erase what he'd done. And when that didn't work the way he wanted, he dumped her remains in a bush and left town. On his way out of the state, he robbed the subway where he worked for extra cash. That detail still makes me sick. The casualness of it. The way he moved on to the next thing, like he was running errands. Murder, disposal, robbery, escape. All part of the same day. All part of the same plan. But the part that haunts me the most didn't come from headlines or court documents. It came from the autopsy report. She had defensive wounds. When I learned that, it changed everything. Gouges in her hands, fingers damaged so badly that some were missing. Evidence that she didn't just freeze or collapse. She fought. She tried to protect herself. She tried to survive. I think about that more than anything else. About her hands. About the instinct to shield your face. To grab. To push away. To cling to life even when you're terrified and in pain. About how aware she must have been in those moments. How much fear she must have felt. How much determination. She wasn't passive. She wasn't resigned. She resisted with everything she had. And that breaks my heart all over again. She had an infant child waiting at home for her, a baby who needed her, who depended on her completely. I can't stop myself from imagining that thought crossing her mind in those final moments, wondering if she thought about her baby, if that knowledge gave her strength or made the terror worse, if she fought harder because she wanted to get back home. She didn't deserve any of it. She didn't deserve to suffer. She didn't deserve to be chosen at random by someone who wanted to destroy a life just to prove he could. She didn't deserve to be reduced to evidence and reports and forensic details. She was a person. She was loved. She mattered. There's a special kind of cruelty in knowing that someone fought so hard and still didn't make it. People like to imagine that fighting back guarantees survival, that bravery is rewarded. The truth is more complicated and more painful. Sometimes courage doesn't save you. Sometimes it just means you were conscious and aware of what was happening to you. That knowledge sits heavy. Over the years, I've thought a lot about how violence like this ripples outward. It doesn't stop with the victim. It reaches into families, into children who grow up without a parent, into relatives who carry anger and grief and unanswered questions for the rest of their lives. It changes how you see the world, how safe you feel at parties, how you think about chance encounters and strangers and the illusion of control we all live with. What hurts the most is the unfairness of it. That her life ended, not because of anything she did, but because someone else wanted to feel powerful or alive or something equally empty and monstrous. That her suffering was so extreme, so intimate, and so unnecessary. I try to remember her as more than the way she died. I try to think about who she was before that night. Her laugh, her personality, the way she held her baby, the ordinary moments that never make it into news stories but are the real substance of a life. Still, the image of her fighting back never leaves me. It makes me proud of her in a strange, painful way, and it makes me furious at the same time. Proud that she didn't give up. Furious that she ever had to be that strong in the first place. Some deaths feel distant, like tragedies that belong to history or statistics. This one never will. It lives in the detail, in the knowledge that she resisted, in the reality that she had so much waiting for her at home, in the understanding that sometimes the world is unimaginably cruel for no reason at all. She deserved to grow old. She deserved to raise her child. She deserved a life that didn't end in terror and violence. And no matter how much time passes, that truth doesn't soften. It just becomes something you learn to carry. I'm in Australia, and at the time this happened, I was working night shift in the faults department for the telco I was employed with. Night shift had its own rhythm. Fewer people, dimmer lights, a kind of quiet focus broken up by bursts of activity when something went wrong somewhere in the network. To keep ourselves awake, we usually had the TV news on in the ops area, mostly as background noise more than anything else. That night started like any other. Then the news cut in. We saw the first plane hit the World Trade Center, and at first there was confusion more than anything else. The early reports were cautious, talking about a possible accident, maybe a small plane, maybe a navigation error. Even watching the footage, it was hard to process. The scale of the building, the smoke pouring out, the way the camera angles struggled to make sense of what had just happened. It felt unreal, like something from a movie that had accidentally been spliced into the news. We were all watching more closely now, conversations trailing off, keyboards going quiet. Then we saw the second plane hit live. There was no ambiguity after that. No room for maybe. The moment that second plane slammed into the tower, the entire atmosphere in the room changed. You could feel it physically, like the air had been sucked out. Someone swore under their breath. Someone else just said, "Oh my God," over and over again. I remember thinking very clearly that we were watching history happen in real time, and that it was going to be bad in ways we couldn't yet imagine. From that point on, work became secondary, even though we were still technically on shift. Calls kept coming in, but everyone was distracted, glancing up at the screens whenever there was movement or a new angle. The footage was relentless. Smoke, fire, people running, anchors struggling to keep their voices steady. About an hour after the second plane hit, our center's boss arrived. That alone told us how serious things were. Night shift management usually didn't show up unless something was very wrong. She looked pale, tense, like she'd driven in without really thinking about the route. Almost immediately after she arrived, she took a conference call. We could see her off to the side, headset on, pacing slightly. Later, we found out who was on that call. Other center managers who had also been called in, the big boss, and representatives from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. That was when it really hit home how close this was going to be. There were Australians working in the World Trade Center, Australians living in New York, Australians visiting as tourists. Families back home were going to start calling, desperate for information, hoping we could tell them something, anything, about loved ones who might be caught up in it. The instructions that came down after that call were clear and brutal in their simplicity. We were to be calm, we were to be honest, and we were to tell callers that we had no information, no lists of survivors, no confirmation, no details beyond what was publicly known. We were not to speculate. We were not to offer false hope. We were not to say anything that couldn't be backed up. In theory, that makes sense. In practice, it was gut-wrenching. The calls started coming in, slowly at first, then more frequently as the morning went on. People asking if we could check on a phone line, if we could see whether a mobile had connected recently, if we had any internal information. Some were calm, trying to sound reasonable. Others were already panicking. You could hear it in their voices, the strain, the fear, the way they were clinging to the idea that maybe someone on the other end of the line could help. And all we could say was that we didn't know, over and over again. "I'm sorry, we don't have any information at this time. I understand how hard this is, but we don't have access to that. We're monitoring the situation, but we can't confirm anything." It felt useless. It felt cruel, even though it wasn't. You could hear people breaking down in real time, their hope draining away with every non-answer. Some callers stayed on the line longer than necessary, not because they had more questions, but because they didn't want to hang up and be alone with their thoughts. While we were taking those calls, the footage kept playing. We saw the towers burning. We saw the smoke thicken. We saw people at the windows. And then we saw people jumping. That's the part that still comes back to me sometimes, uninvited. Watching people make that choice, live on television, knowing the alternative was worse, seeing bodies fall in silence while commentators struggled not to react. Knowing that some of the callers we were speaking to might be watching the same images, wondering if one of those tiny figures was someone they loved. A few callers asked directly about that. They asked if we knew anything about people who had jumped, if there was any way to identify them, if there was any chance they survived. Those were the hardest conversations. There is no way to answer questions like that without causing pain, no matter what you say or don't say. As the morning rolled on, the volume of calls increased. Word spread. More people woke up. More people realized the scale of what was happening. The day shift started to arrive, walking into a workplace that felt nothing like a normal handover. Usual routines went straight out the window. There was no neat briefing, no orderly transition. Information was shared in fragments, in hurried sentences, in looks that said more than words could. People hugged. Some cried openly. Others went quiet, focused, almost mechanical, because that was the only way to keep functioning. By the time my shift ended, I felt hollowed out. Going home that morning was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The sun was up. People were going about their day. Traffic moved like it always did. The world looked normal, and that felt wrong, deeply wrong. It felt like stepping out of a nightmare into a place that didn't know it was supposed to be horrified. My wife had already gone to work. The house was empty when I got there. I sat down, turned on the TV, and immediately regretted it. The coverage was everywhere. Replays, analysis, speculation. The same images over and over again, each time stripping away a little more distance, a little more numbness. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard voices from the calls. I saw the second plane hit again. I saw people falling. My mind kept replaying the night, trying to process it, trying to file it away somewhere manageable. There was no decompression, no gradual winding down, just a hard stop after hours of emotional overload. Even now, years later, I can still remember the feeling of that ops room, the glow of the screens, the silence after the second impact, the way our boss looked after that phone call, the sound of people asking for help we couldn't give. Watching the events of September 11th unfold live from the other side of the world was surreal. Being part of the machinery that had to respond to the human fallout, even in such a limited way, made it personal in a way I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just history anymore. It was voices in my ear, pain carried through phone lines, and the knowledge that sometimes all you can offer someone is the truth that you don't know. That night changed how I think about distance, about disasters happening somewhere else, about how connected we all are, whether we like it or not. And it left me with a quiet respect for the people who answer phones, staff operation centers, and sit in those chairs when the world breaks, knowing full well that they're going to carry pieces of it home with them when their shift ends. I'll never forget watching that second plane hit. But I'll also never forget the calls that followed and how powerless it felt to be on the line when history was collapsing in real time and all anyone wanted was a scrap of certainty that simply didn't exist. This happened when I was just starting to recover from COVID, back in August of 2020, the original strain, the one before vaccines, before people really understood what it could do to a body. In my case, it nearly killed me. I was sick in a way I had never been sick before. Not just physically, but mentally too. Everything felt off. Time blurred. Sleep wasn't normal. My body felt weak and unfamiliar, like it wasn't fully mine anymore. By the time this happened, I was technically getting better, but I was still exhausted all the time. The kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones. I would sleep for hours and still wake up feeling like I hadn't rested at all. My head felt foggy. My thoughts were slow. I chalked it up to recovery and tried not to overthink it. One night, in the middle of that period, I woke up suddenly. Not gradually, not groggy, just awake. The room was dark, lit only by faint ambient light from outside. At first, I didn't know why I had woken up. Then I saw him. There was someone standing next to my bed. My first thought wasn't panic. It was confusion. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it. Shadows, light from outside, sleep paralysis. I told myself I was half dreaming. That's what you're supposed to do in moments like that. You explain it away before fear has time to take hold. I remember thinking, okay, this is just a trick of the light. He was standing on the side of the bed, close enough that if he were real, he would have been well inside my personal space. He wasn't facing me directly. He was turned about 3/4 away, like someone standing near you but not quite engaging. That detail is burned into my memory. I decided to stand up. In my head, that was the test. If I changed my perspective, the illusion would break. Shadows don't hold up when you move. Hallucinations blur or shift. Your brain fills in gaps when you're lying still, but movement usually snaps things back into place. So I stood up. He was still there. And that's when fear hit me full force. I saw him clearly, not vaguely, not like a shadow or a blur. Clearly. He had short hair. I could see the outline of it. He was wearing a plaid shirt, tucked neatly into a pair of jeans. That detail, the shirt being tucked in, is one of the things that makes it so unsettling to remember. It wasn't random. It wasn't dreamlike. It was specific, ordinary, real. He didn't move. He didn't turn toward me. He didn't speak. He just stood there, like he belonged there, like he had every right to be in that room. My brain completely lost its grip at that point. I started screaming. It wasn't a controlled scream or a shout for help. It was pure, instinctive terror. I reached up blindly and yanked the cord on the ceiling fan, fumbling for it in the dark while still screaming. The light came on, and he was gone. Not fading, not stepping back, not dissolving, just gone. 1 second he was there, solid and unmistakable, and the next second there was nothing. Empty space. My bedroom, exactly as it should have been. I stood there shaking, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My throat hurt from screaming. The room felt wrong, like it had just snapped back into place after being distorted. I checked everything. The door was locked. The windows were closed. There was nowhere anyone could have gone in that amount of time. No sound of footsteps, no movement, no explanation. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the edge of the bed with the light on until morning, replaying it over and over in my head, trying to find the flaw, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it, that my brain, still recovering from COVID, had misfired in some spectacular way. But the problem was how real it felt. I've had vivid dreams before. I've had nightmares. I've had moments where I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. This was nothing like that. This was as real as seeing another person standing in front of you in broad daylight. There was no fuzziness, no uncertainty, no sense that it might not be real while it was happening. That's what scared me the most. Later on, when I had the chance, I told a neurologist about it. I wasn't telling the story for drama. I was genuinely worried. COVID had already done so much damage to my body. I was concerned about my brain, about hallucinations, about long-term effects, about whether something had been permanently altered. I explained exactly what I saw, how clear it was, how it didn't disappear when I moved, how it vanished instantly when the light came on. The neurologist didn't reassure me. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't immediately explain it away. He just looked at me for a long time, a really long time, long enough that the silence became uncomfortable. Then he changed the subject. No explanation, no follow-up questions, no "this is common" or "this happens sometimes." Just a pivot to something else entirely. That reaction bothered me almost as much as the experience itself. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he didn't want to scare me. Maybe he didn't have a good answer. Maybe he thought it was a one-off hallucination tied to illness and didn't want to reinforce it by dwelling on it. I'll never know. But the way he avoided the topic made it feel heavier, not lighter. At the time, I was living in a house that was over 200 years old. That fact didn't bother me before this happened. Old houses have character. They creak. They settle. They feel different from modern buildings, but I'd never felt afraid there. After that night, though, it was impossible not to think about it. About who had lived there before. How many people had passed through those rooms. How many lives had unfolded within those walls. I'm not someone who automatically believes in ghosts. I don't go looking for supernatural explanations. But when something like that happens to you, something that vivid and unexplainable, your mind starts reaching for any framework that might make sense of it. Was it a COVID hallucination? Possibly. The virus was known to cause neurological symptoms, especially early on. People reported delirium, vivid dreams, paranoia, things that felt real but weren't. That explanation is logical, and I try to hold on to it. But then there's the other part of my brain, the part that remembers how clear he looked, how specific the details were, how he didn't behave like a dream image, how he didn't dissolve or shift or blur when I moved. And that part of my brain doesn't shut up easily. What really messes with me is that the figure didn't feel threatening in an obvious way. He wasn't lunging, he wasn't looming, he wasn't doing anything dramatic. He was just there, like he had always been there. Like I was the one who didn't belong. That's harder to explain than outright terror. If it had been a monster or something obviously unreal, I could dismiss it more easily. But he looked like a normal man. Someone you might pass on the street. Someone you wouldn't look twice at in daylight. That normality is what makes it stick. I've never seen anything like that before or since. No repeat experiences. No shadows, no figures, no voices, nothing. Just that one night and that one moment during that strange period of recovery, when my body and mind were already pushed to their limits. I don't tell this story often because it sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. People want a neat answer. They want you to say, it was just a hallucination, or it was sleep paralysis, or it was a ghost. And the truth is, I don't know which, if any, of those explanations is correct. All I know is that it scared the absolute crap out of me. Not in a fun, spooky story way, in a deep, unsettling way that makes you question how reliable your own senses really are. How thin the line might be between what we call reality and whatever else our brains are capable of producing under the right conditions. Even now, years later, I can still picture him. The angle of his body, the pattern of the plaid shirt, the way the room looked around him. That memory hasn't faded the way dreams usually do. It stayed sharp, like a photograph burned into my head. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if it was my brain misfiring after a serious illness, or stress, or exhaustion, or something else entirely. I don't know if that house had anything to do with it, or if that's just my mind trying to assign meaning where there may be none. What I do know is that it felt real in a way nothing imaginary ever has. And once you've experienced something like that, once you've stood in a dark room staring at a figure that shouldn't exist, and then watched it vanish the instant the light comes on, it changes you a little. It makes you less certain, less dismissive, less confident that you fully understand the boundaries of your own perception. I still lean toward a medical explanation. I have to. But there's a small part of me that will always wonder. And that part remembers exactly how scared I was, standing there in an old house, heart racing, staring at an empty space where someone had just been. Whatever it was, I hope I never experience anything like it again. I'm from Brownsville, Brooklyn, NYC. Any New Yorker can tell you it's not a place to raise your kids. That's not something people usually argue about. If you grew up in New York, you already know the reputation. Brownsville has a history, and not the kind they put on postcards. It's the kind of place where you learn street awareness early, where parents worry every time their kids step outside, and where survival often comes before comfort. I was young, but I could already feel the difference the moment we moved. Before that, I lived in Canarsie. It was a Caribbean neighborhood, mostly families, mostly people who knew each other. I'm Jamaican, and in Canarsie, that felt normal. You heard reggae playing from cars, smelled food cooking in houses, saw aunties talking on stoops. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like home. People looked out for each other, kids played outside. There was a sense of community that made you feel safe, or at least safer. Moving to Ocean Hill, Brownsville was a shock. Everything felt heavier there, louder, more tense. The buildings were older, the streets felt more open, but somehow more dangerous at the same time. You didn't just walk around without thinking. You paid attention to who was around you, where you were going, and how fast you needed to get there. Even during the day, there was an edge to the place. One day, not long after we moved, I went to visit a friend who lived in the Langston Hughes houses. It was daytime when I got there. The sun was out, people were around, and on the surface, it didn't seem too bad. I came in from the Sumter and Rockaway station. The walk wasn't long, but in that area, distance doesn't matter as much as perception. Because I was new to the area, my friend didn't want me walking alone. His older brother came to escort me. He was mixed up at the time, involved in things he probably shouldn't have been. But in that neighborhood, that also meant protection. People recognized him. They knew who he was. Walking next to him felt safer than walking by myself. We made it to the building without any problems. Once inside, things felt normal enough. Me and my friend did what kids do. We chilled, talked trash, played video games, argued over whose turn it was, and forgot about everything else for a while. When you're inside, with the door closed, it's easy to pretend the outside world doesn't exist. His apartment had a clear view from the windows. If you looked out, you could see a wide stretch of open street. There weren't many buildings blocking the view, which meant you could see a lot of what was happening outside. That kind of view can be comforting, but it can also show you things you wish you hadn't seen. At some point, while we were playing games, we noticed something strange. A group of people were gathering in an alley not far from the building. At first, it didn't look threatening. It just looked odd. They were lining up in a straight line, one behind the other, like they were organizing themselves for something. We stopped playing and went to the window to get a better look. From where we were, it was hard to tell exactly what was going on. It didn't look like a fight. It didn't look like a drug deal. It didn't look like anything we could immediately recognize. It was just a bunch of people standing close together in a way that didn't make sense. Being obnoxious New Yorkers, especially young ones, we started making jokes. We laughed and joked about it being a parade. Then we joked that it looked like they were getting ready for a gay pride parade or something. We weren't thinking seriously. We were bored kids making fun of something that looked strange from far away. We didn't expect there to be an actual explanation that would be worse than anything we imagined. The longer we watched, the clearer it became that this was not a parade. The movement was wrong. The spacing was wrong. The way they were interacting didn't match anything innocent. Slowly, realization started to creep in, piece by piece, until it hit us all at once. It wasn't paranormal. It wasn't some secret ritual. It wasn't anything mysterious or supernatural. It was just a bunch of dudes running a train on each other, out in the open, in broad daylight, in an alley near a housing project. The moment that realization set in, the jokes stopped. There was a brief second of silence, followed by uncomfortable laughter, then disbelief. We couldn't unsee it. We couldn't explain it away. It was exactly what it looked like. And it was happening right there like it was nothing. That was Brownsville. Not scary in a ghost story way. Not eerie or mysterious. Just raw, uncomfortable, and real in a way that makes your stomach turn. It wasn't about fear of the unknown. It was about seeing something you didn't expect and realizing that in some places, people really do live like tomorrow doesn't matter. We stepped away from the window after that. The vibe in the room changed. Suddenly, the apartment felt smaller. The outside world felt closer. The idea that anything could happen at any time stopped being abstract and became very real. Later, when it was time for me to leave, we had to go through the elevator. That's when my friend decided to mess with me. He told me there was a ghost in the elevator. Not a normal ghost either. He said it was a crack-smoking ghost that haunted the building. He made weird sounds, exaggerated spooky noises, talking about it floating around, smoking mad crack, saying nonsense like, "Oh!" I knew he was joking. I could hear it in his voice. But in a place like that, after seeing what we saw earlier, even jokes hit differently. Your mind is already on edge. You're already thinking about how strange the world can be. So when the elevator doors closed and the lights flickered just a little, my heart jumped anyway. Nothing happened, of course. No ghost appeared. No shadow moved. The elevator worked like it was supposed to. But I still remember how tense I felt standing there, waiting for the doors to open. Not because I believed in the ghost, but because the day had already shown me that reality itself could be disturbing enough. When I finally got outside and started heading home, I felt relieved. The air felt different once I put distance between myself and that building. Still, the images from that day stuck with me. Not the joke about the ghost, but the reminder of where I was and what kind of place it was. Brownsville didn't need paranormal stories to be unsettling. Life itself provided enough strange, uncomfortable moments to last a lifetime. Looking back now, I can laugh at parts of it. The dumb jokes, the way kids try to make sense of things by turning them into humor, the fake ghost story at the end. But underneath that laughter is the understanding that some places force you to grow up faster than others. That day taught me something important. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about ghosts or demons or things that go bump in the night. Sometimes they're about real people, real choices, and real environments where anything can happen, and often does. And if you're from New York, especially from places like Brownsville, you don't need anyone to explain that to you. You already know. My grandfather used to tell my father a story that stayed with him for the rest of his life, and eventually it was passed down to me. It wasn't the kind of story you tell for fun or to scare children on purpose. It was told quietly, seriously, as something that had genuinely happened. What made it even more unsettling was that it didn't come only from my grandfather. Other people who had known him, people who worked with him or lived in the same area, told the same story with the same details. When my grandfather was younger, he worked late hours. Every night, he had to walk home alone from his workplace, taking the same route through a particular street. At the time, my city was very different from how it is now. The streets were darker, less populated at night, and surrounded by empty lots and poorly lit areas. People relied more on word of mouth than news, and local legends were taken seriously. One of the strongest legends back then was about werewolves. People genuinely believed in them. It wasn't treated like a joke or a fairy tale. Stories were told about strange creatures, about animals that weren't quite animals, about things that walked at night and watched people from the shadows. Most people avoided certain streets after dark because of these stories. The street my grandfather walked through was one of those places. He said that one night as he was heading home, he became aware that something was following him. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. When you walk alone at night, every sound feels louder. Every shadow feels closer. But then he heard footsteps that didn't sound human. Heavy steps, slow, steady. When he turned around, he saw it. A massive black dog. It wasn't like any dog people were used to seeing. This thing was enormous. My grandfather estimated it to be around 1.6 meters tall, far bigger than any normal dog. Its body was solid and dark, almost absorbing the little light that reached it, and its eyes were red. Not reflecting light like an animal's eyes usually do, but glowing red, fixed directly on him. The dog didn't bark. It didn't growl. It just followed him. Every night after that, it was the same. As soon as my grandfather left work and started down that street, the dog would appear. Sometimes it would be a short distance behind him. Other times it would be closer. Always silent. Always watching. Always walking at the same pace as him. Never rushing. Never falling behind. He tried changing his speed. When he walked faster, it walked faster. When he slowed down, it slowed down. When he stopped for a moment, it stopped too. People at his workplace knew about it. He wasn't the only one who had seen the dog. Other workers talked about it in hushed voices, especially those who left late at night. They warned each other not to go down that street. Many of them refused to take that route at all, even if it meant walking much farther to get home. The fear wasn't just because of the dog itself, but because of what it represented. Everyone connected it to the werewolf legends. A black dog with red eyes, unnaturally large, appearing night after night, following people, but never attacking. In those days, people believed such creatures were omens, or guardians of something, or not fully animals at all. Some believed it wasn't a dog, but something pretending to be one. My grandfather said the worst part wasn't that it followed him. It was the way it looked at him. He said it felt intelligent, aware, like it understood him and was choosing to stay just out of reach. He never felt like it wanted to kill him immediately. It felt more like it was waiting. Despite the fear, he kept walking that way. He didn't have much choice. It was the fastest route home, and he couldn't afford to be late or take longer paths every night. He learned to keep his head forward and not look back too often, but he always knew the dog was there. And then, one night, it wasn't. He walked the same street at the same time, expecting that familiar sense of dread to creep in. But nothing happened. No footsteps, no red eyes in the dark, no massive shape moving behind him. The next night, it didn't appear again. Or the night after that. The dog was just gone. There was no explanation, no body found, no sightings, no gradual disappearance. It simply stopped showing up, as if it had never existed at all. People at his workplace noticed too. The fear around that street slowly faded, but the confusion stayed. What made the story so disturbing was how consistent it was. My grandfather never changed the details. The size, the eyes, the silence, the way it followed him. And when others told the story, they described the same thing. The same black dog, the same red eyes, the same street. Years later, when my dad told me the story, he didn't laugh. He didn't treat it like folklore. He told it the way someone tells a memory they still don't understand. And when I asked other people who knew my grandfather, they confirmed it. They had heard the same story directly from him, long before he ever told my dad. That's what makes it unsettling. It wasn't just one person's imagination. It wasn't a single late-night hallucination. It was something shared, remembered, and quietly agreed upon by multiple people. Something that appeared night after night, inspired real fear, changed people's behavior, and then vanished without explanation. Whether it was a real animal, a shared fear shaped by local legends, or something else entirely, no one can say for sure. But the way it stayed with my grandfather, and the way it stayed with everyone who heard the story, suggests it was more than just a rumor. Even now, when I think about it, I imagine that street at night. The silence. A lone man walking home. And behind him, just out of reach of the light, a massive black shape with red eyes following patiently, until one day it decided it was finished and disappeared forever. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.